The emergency dispatcher's voice crackles through decades of magnetic tape decay, but the terror remains crystal clear. Help us. They're not really military. They're static. Then, nothing. August 26th, 1989, 11:47 p.m. The last words anyone would hear from the Riverside, California Travel Club that had started their Nevada adventure 3 days earlier with coolers full of ice and cameras loaded with film. Mile marker 314 on State Route 50 sits in a landscape God seems to have forgotten. Sagebrush stretches toward mountains that look painted on the horizon. The main highway curves east toward Utah, but a ghost road branches north 20 miles of cracked asphalt that disappears into restricted airspace where the military once tested bombs. Rusted sawhorses block the entrance. A sun-bleached sign warns, "Do not enter." 12 vehicles ignored those warnings. Families seeking shortcuts and spectacular desert views, following a hand-drawn map that promised hidden wonders beyond the barriers. What they found instead was a trap 20 years in the making, operated by people who considered that wasteland in their personal hunting ground. State Route 50 earned its nickname honestly. Between Ely and Fernley, Nevada, you can drive for hours without seeing another soul. The asphalt cuts through basin and range country where the mountains rise like broken teeth and the valleys stretch wider than some states. In summer, the heat shimmers up from the pavement in waves that make the distant peaks dance like mirages. Life magazine called it the loneliest road in America in 1986, warning drivers to carry survival gear and tell someone their route. The tourism board in Nevada turned the insult into advertising gold, printing up bumper stickers and offering certificates to anyone who completed the crossing. But locals knew certain stretches demanded more respect than others. Mile marker 314 sat at one of those places. The main highway curved northeast toward Ely, following the old Pony Express route through relatively gentle terrain. But just before the curve, a narrow road branched north. No signs marked it officially. Maps from the 50s showed it as a military access route, built during the atomic testing years, when the desert bloomed with mushroom clouds, and the government needed ways to move equipment into remote areas. By 1989, that road had been abandoned for over a decade. Budget cuts and changed priorities left it to the elements. Frost heaves cracked the asphalt. Sand drifted across the surface in waves. The sawhorses blocking the entrance had been placed by the county sheriff, not federal authorities, a practical measure to keep tourists from getting lost in terrain that could kill them. The Humboldt National Forest stretched beyond the barriers, but this wasn't recreational wilderness. 20 miles north lay the Hawthorne Army Depot, and beyond that, restricted airspace where experimental aircraft still flew patterns that didn't appear on civilian charts. The military had withdrawn from active bombing exercises, but unexploded ordnance remained scattered across the landscape like deadly Easter eggs waiting for the unwary. Truckers knew to avoid the turnoff. The CB radio networks that connected long-haul drivers carried stories about that stretch, vehicles found weeks later, stripped clean and burned, their occupants never located. Official explanations blamed mechanical failures and exposure, but the pattern was too consistent for coincidence. The Vacation Club of Riverside County had been planning their Nevada adventure for 18 months. 12 families, 43 people total, ranging from teenagers to grandparents in their 70s. They owned a fleet of recreational vehicles, motorhomes, travel trailers, conversion vans, and they liked to explore the American West in convoy formation, following routes that promised solitude and scenery. Their leader was Harold Westbrook, a retired engineer who approached travel with the same methodical precision he had once applied to building aircraft engines. Westbrook spent weeks researching routes, marking potential stops, calculating fuel requirements, and water needs. He carried laminated maps, backup compasses, and emergency supplies sufficient for a week in the wilderness. The August trip was supposed to be their masterpiece, a loop through eastern Nevada and western Utah that would take them past ghost towns, hot springs, and rock formations that rarely appeared in tourist guides. Westbrook had plotted their course to avoid major highways, seeking the authentic frontier experience that drew them away from cities in the first place. They departed Riverside on August 23, 1989, as the morning sun painted the San Bernardino Mountains gold. 12 vehicles in careful formation, Westbrook's 30-foot Winnebago leading, followed by travel trailers towed by pickup trucks, 2 smaller motorhomes, and 3 conversion vans bringing up the rear. Each vehicle carried CB radios tuned to Channel 19, allowing constant communication across the convoy. Their route took them northeast through Barstow and Tonopah, following highways that grew progressively narrower and more isolated. By the evening of August 25th, they had reached Ely, Nevada, where they camped at a KOA facility and prepared for the final leg toward Utah's canyon country. That night in the campground, Westbrook studied his maps one final time. He had marked State Route 50 as their primary route, but a fellow camper had mentioned an alternative, a scenic cutoff that promised better views and fewer commercial stops. The stranger produced a hand-drawn map, copied from what he claimed was a Forest Service guide, showing the Ghost Road as a maintained, scenic byway. The map was a masterpiece of deception. It showed the 20-mile cutoff connecting smoothly to Utah highways, eliminating 100 miles of interstate driving. Better still, it marked several points of interest along the route: ancient petroglyphs, a hidden canyon, a natural spring. For travelers seeking authentic wilderness experiences, it seemed perfect. Westbrook made photocopies for the other families and modified their departure plans. Instead of following Route 50 to its junction with Interstate 80, they would take the scenic cutoff and approach Utah through backcountry that promised solitude and spectacular views. Morning broke clear and cold over the Nevada desert, with temperatures that would climb past 100 degrees by noon. The Riverside convoy departed Ely at 7:30 a.m., following State Route 50 northwest toward the mountains. Their CB radios chattered with excitement as they discussed the day's route and the adventure that lay ahead. Harold Westbrook felt confident in his planning. The hand-drawn map appeared professionally done, complete with mileage notations and topographic details. The stranger who had provided it claimed to work for the Bureau of Land Management and spoke knowledgeably about desert travel. Every detail checked out except one. The map showed no barriers at the turnoff. They reached mile marker 314 at 9:15 a.m., with the desert already beginning to shimmer in the rising heat. The main highway curved northeast toward distant mountains, but the Ghost Road branched north through a gap in the ridgeline. Westbrook pulled his Winnebago to the shoulder and examined the barriers through binoculars. 2 rusted sawhorses blocked the pavement, connected by a single strand of cable. Beyond them, the road appeared to be in reasonable condition, better than some mountain passes they had traversed in previous trips. A small sign warned, "Do not enter," but it showed no official agency markings or specific prohibitions. Over the CB radio, other families voiced their opinions. The Hendersons thought they should stick to the main highway. The Martinez family wanted to explore the cutoff, arguing that many Forest Service roads use similar barriers to discourage casual traffic while remaining open to experienced travelers. Westbrook made the decision that would doom them all. The barriers appeared to be county-installed, not federal. The road beyond looked passable. Their vehicles carried four-wheel drive capability, and they had planned for off-road conditions. They would move the barriers just enough to allow passage, then replace them behind the convoy. Young Tom Martinez, 22 years old and eager to prove his desert driving skills, volunteered to clear the path. He drove his pickup truck forward, lifted the cable, and moved one sawhorse aside. The convoy rolled past in single file, dust clouds marking their passage like signals in the desert air. Within 24 hours, every person in those 12 vehicles would be dead. The family that controlled the Ghost Road had lived in this desert longer than the barriers that tried to keep people out. The Harlows traced their Nevada roots back 3 generations to the mining boom that brought prospectors into these mountains in search of silver and gold. When the mines played out and the towns died, most families moved on. The Harlows stayed, adapting to whatever opportunities the desert provided. During the atomic testing years, they made good money as cleanup contractors, collecting radioactive debris after each blast and hauling it to disposal sites. The work was dangerous, but it paid better than anything else available in the region. 3 Harlow men died of cancers that doctors attributed to radiation exposure. But the family continued taking government contracts until the testing program ended. Then came the aircraft experiments. Military contractors needed people who could retrieve crashed prototypes from remote locations, stripping them of classified components before curious civilians arrived. The Harlows knew every canyon and wash within 100 miles. They could reach crash sites faster than official recovery teams, and they asked no questions about what they found. By 1989, the military contracts had dwindled, along with the federal budgets that supported them, but the Harlow family had learned valuable skills during their years as salvage operators. They could strip valuable components from complex machinery with speed and efficiency. They knew which metals brought premium prices from scrap dealers and which electronic parts had military applications that made them worth small fortunes on black markets. Most importantly, they understood that isolated stretches of desert made excellent places to pursue enterprises that required privacy. Jeremiah Harlow, 68 years old and the family patriarch, had watched the Ghost Road deteriorate from a maintained military route into an abandoned track that most people avoided. But he had also noticed the occasional tourist who ignored the barriers, seeking shortcuts or scenic views. Those vehicles provided opportunities for a family that had grown expert at making complicated machinery disappear. The system they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Solar-powered motion detectors, salvaged from military installations, monitored the barriers 24 hours a day. When vehicles crossed the line, radio signals alerted family members positioned at strategic points along the 20-mile route. By the time unauthorized visitors reached the halfway point, the Harlows would be ready for them. Their permanent base lay 15 miles north of the highway, hidden in a box canyon that showed no signs of habitation from the air. Solar panels powered their communications equipment. Wells dug during the mining era provided water. Storage buildings, constructed from materials salvaged over decades, held inventory that ranged from aircraft engines to electronic warfare components. Motion sensors triggered at 9:27 a.m. on August 26, 1989. Jeremiah Harlow was drinking coffee in the canyon compound when his radio crackled with the alert. 12 vehicles, traveling in convoy formation, had crossed the barriers and were proceeding north at approximately 35 miles per hour. The old man felt his pulse quicken. Single vehicles or small groups were common enough, but a convoy this size represented possibilities he had never encountered. Recreational vehicles meant families with money. Multiple families meant multiple bank accounts, credit cards, and portable valuables. This could be the score that would set the clan up for years, but it also meant risks. 40-plus people was too many to control using their standard methods. They would need perfect coordination and enough family members to manage the situation without leaving witnesses or evidence. Jeremiah began making radio calls, summoning cousins from across the region. The Harlow clan had scattered across 3 counties, but they maintained close ties and regular communication. Some worked legitimate jobs, ranch hands, mine security guards, long-haul truckers. Others survived through enterprises that required flexibility and discretion. All of them understood that family came first and that questions were dangerous luxuries. Within 30 minutes, 8 Harlows were en route to predetermined positions along the Ghost Road. They carried military surplus equipment and weapons that reflected their years as defense contractors. More importantly, they brought experience in operations that required precise timing and absolute secrecy. The plan they implemented had been rehearsed dozens of times, though never on this scale. Family members would establish a fake military checkpoint at mile marker 8, where the road crested a low ridge between 2 canyon mouths. Official-looking signs would warn travelers that they were entering restricted airspace and that all vehicles required security inspection. Most tourists already nervous about violating apparent federal prohibitions, would submit to searches without resistance. While checkpoint operators examined vehicles and identified valuable cargo, other family members would position themselves to eliminate any possibility of escape or communication with outside authorities. The Harlows had learned from years of salvage operations that successful enterprises depended on controlling information. Nothing could be left to chance. No witnesses could survive to describe what they had seen. No evidence could remain to contradict official explanations for what happened to missing travelers. But the Ghost Road offered natural advantages that made disposal of evidence relatively simple. Old blast craters, scattered across the landscape from atomic testing days, provided ready-made graves that would never be discovered by casual searchers. Flash floods, common in desert washes, could eliminate tracks and scatter debris across vast areas. And the restricted airspace designation meant that even official investigators would face bureaucratic delays in mounting search operations. The Riverside convoy reached the crest of the ridge at 10:35 a.m., exactly when the Harlows expected them. Harold Westbrook, leading in his Winnebago, saw the checkpoint before he could react. Military-style vehicles positioned to block the road, uniformed figures waiting beside official-looking signs. He had no choice but to stop. The checkpoint appeared completely legitimate. Temporary barriers channeled traffic into a single lane, where signs warned that all vehicles must submit to security inspection before entering restricted airspace. Men in military-style uniforms carried clipboards and radios. Behind them, a communications truck bristled with antennas that suggested connection to higher authorities. But experienced eyes would have noticed discrepancies that revealed the deception. The uniforms combined elements from different military branches. The vehicles, while painted in military colors, showed civilian modifications that regulation equipment would never include. Most telling, the inspection procedure violated standard protocols in ways that trained personnel would recognize immediately. Westbrook, however, was a retired aerospace engineer, not a military veteran. He approached the checkpoint with the nervous compliance of a civilian who believed he might have violated federal regulations. When uniformed figures asked him to exit his vehicle and explain his presence in restricted territory, he apologized and produced his maps as evidence of innocent intent. The checkpoint supervisor, who identified himself as Sergeant Morrison, examined Westbrook's documents with professional interest. He explained that the convoy had indeed entered restricted airspace and that all vehicles would require thorough security inspection. The process would take several hours, but comfortable facilities were available for passengers while searches were conducted. Behind Westbrook, the other 11 vehicles pulled into positions dictated by checkpoint personnel. Families were directed to assembly areas where they could rest in the shade while inspections proceeded. Children played games in the dirt. Grandparents complained about the heat. Adults grumbled about bureaucratic inefficiency, but complied with instructions from figures they assumed represented federal authority. None of them realized they were being sorted for execution. The inspection process served multiple purposes. It allowed Harlow family members to identify valuable cargo without arousing suspicion. It separated adults from children and isolated individuals who might pose resistance. Most importantly, it provided time for additional family members to reach the checkpoint and assume positions around the perimeter. By noon, 8 Harlows occupied carefully chosen locations around the inspection site. They carried weapons that could eliminate the entire group within minutes if coordination proved necessary. But Jeremiah Harlow preferred subtlety when possible. Mass killings created problems that individual disappearances avoided. The solution they implemented reflected years of experience with desert disposal methods. Death came to the Riverside travelers one family at a time, beginning with those whose vehicles contained the most valuable cargo. The Hendersons, who owned a 40-foot motorhome equipped with expensive electronics, were the first to be escorted away from the main group for what checkpoint personnel described as enhanced security screening. The family of 4 was led to a position behind the communications truck where they were told that their vehicle contained equipment that required specialized inspection. while 2 Harlows kept them occupied with questions about their electronics. A third approached from behind with tools that ended their suffering quickly and quietly. Other families, still waiting their turn for inspection, heard nothing unusual. The sounds of desert wind, running generators, and normal conversation masked what was happening less than 50 yards away. Children continued playing games. Adults continued complaining about delays. No one noticed that the Hendersons had simply vanished from the assembly area. The Martinez family was next, followed by the Westbrooks and then the Sullivans. Each group was escorted away under pretense of security requirements. Each disappeared without creating alarm among the remaining families. The Harlows had perfected these techniques during decades of salvage operations, learning to eliminate security guards and civilian witnesses with efficiency that left no evidence of struggle. By 3 p.m., 37 people had been systematically murdered in the desert heat, their bodies dragged to positions behind the ridge where they would remain hidden from the road. Only 6 travelers remained alive: the Morrison family, whose conversion van had been positioned at the rear of the convoy. James Morrison, 45 years old and a veteran of Vietnam combat, had begun noticing details that troubled him. The checkpoint supervisor's uniform displayed rank insignia that didn't match his claimed assignment. The inspection procedure violated security protocols that Morrison remembered from his military service. Most disturbing, families were being escorted away, but never returning to the assembly area. When checkpoint personnel called for the Morrisons to report for enhanced screening, James Morrison made a decision that revealed everything. Instead of complying, he grabbed his wife and 2 teenage children and ran toward their vehicle, shouting warnings to anyone within earshot. The deception collapsed in seconds. Harlow family members dropped their military pretense and opened fire with automatic weapons that no legitimate checkpoint would carry. James Morrison died trying to shield his family from bullets that shattered the van's windows and punctured its fuel tank. But the veteran's sacrifice accomplished something the Harlows had not anticipated. In his final moments, Morrison managed to reach his CB radio and broadcast a desperate emergency call that would survive as the only evidence of what happened on the Ghost Road that day. "Mayday, mayday, anybody out there? This is not a military checkpoint. They're killing people." The transmission lasted exactly 17 seconds before automatic weapons fire silenced James Morrison's voice forever. But those 17 seconds traveled across the Nevada desert on radio waves that connected truck stops, highway patrol stations, and emergency dispatch centers across 3 states. The nearest facility to receive Morrison's transmission was the Nye County Sheriff's Department Dispatch Center in Tonopah, 60 miles southeast of the checkpoint. Dispatcher Sarah Chen was monitoring routine traffic when Morrison's panic-stricken voice cut through the static on the emergency frequency. Chen immediately attempted to respond, requesting Morrison's location and nature of his emergency. When she received no answer, she began contacting other agencies to determine if anyone else had heard the transmission and could triangulate its source. But radio propagation in the basin and range country was notoriously unreliable, and Morrison's signal had been too weak and brief for accurate positioning. What would you do if you were responsible for emergency response in a region larger than some states? With communication systems that left vast areas in radio shadow, and you received a 17-second distress call that mentioned killing but provided no location data? Chen followed established protocols, notifying her supervisor and requesting assistance from federal agencies that had jurisdiction over military installations in the region. The response she received illuminated the bureaucratic complexities that would ultimately protect the Harlows from investigation. The Ghost Road lay within a patchwork of federal, state, and county jurisdictions. The military denied operating checkpoints in the area. The Forest Service claimed no knowledge of authorized activities that would require security inspections. County authorities lacked resources to search vast areas of desert terrain without better information about the transmission's source. Chen's report disappeared into administrative channels, where it competed for attention with dozens of other incidents across Nevada's enormous geography. By the time investigators might have reached the checkpoint area, The Harlows had implemented cleanup procedures that would eliminate every trace of what had occurred there. But Chen saved the recording of Morrison's transmission, sensing that it documented something significant even if she couldn't determine what. That tape would survive in evidence files for years, the only proof that the Riverside County Vacation Club had encountered something in the desert that killed them all within minutes of calling for help. The silence that followed Morrison's broadcast was complete and permanent. The Harlow family had 4 hours of daylight left to eliminate 43 bodies, 12 vehicles, and every trace of the checkpoint that had never officially existed. They approached the task with methodical precision that reflected decades of experience in making complicated evidence disappear. Bodies were the priority. Desert heat accelerated decomposition, but discovery could still occur if remains were left near any route that searchers might follow. The Harlows had identified suitable disposal sites during their years of salvage operations, blast craters from the atomic testing era, scattered across terrain that would never be thoroughly searched. 3 craters lay within 5 miles of the checkpoint, each large enough to accommodate multiple bodies and deep enough to prevent discovery by casual observers. Family members used military surplus trucks to transport remains to these locations, where they were covered with layers of sand, rock, and metal debris that would mask their presence from both visual detection and ground-penetrating radar. Vehicle disposal required different techniques. 12 recreational vehicles represented millions of dollars in value, but they also contained identification numbers, registration documents, and personal belongings that could connect their owners to the Harlows if discovered intact. The family had developed a systematic approach to processing such evidence during their careers as defense contractors. Valuable components were stripped first: engines, transmissions, electronic equipment, and anything else that could be sold to scrap dealers without raising suspicion. Vehicle identification numbers were ground away with portable tools. Registration documents and personal papers were burned in steel drums that contained the ashes until they could be scattered across vast areas. What remained empty shells of recreational vehicles that no longer contained identifying features were hauled to remote washes where they would be burned and buried. Flash floods, common in the desert during late summer thunderstorms, would eventually scatter debris across terrain that stretched toward the Utah border. The checkpoint itself had been designed for rapid disassembly. Temporary barriers were military surplus equipment that could be loaded onto trucks within minutes. Signs and communications gear were portable items that left no permanent traces. Within 2 hours of Morrison's final transmission, the ridge where 43 people had died showed no evidence that human activity had ever occurred there. But the Harlows understood that successful concealment required more than physical cleanup. Evidence of failure. Jeremiah Harlow had learned during his years as a defense contractor that truly effective cover-ups required active deception, not merely passive concealment. Government agencies would eventually investigate the Riverside convoy's disappearance, but their search could be misdirected through carefully planted evidence that suggested alternative explanations. The first layer of deception was already in place. The hand-drawn map that had lured the convoy onto the ghost road would connect their disappearance to legitimate recreational travel gone wrong, not to criminal activity. The barriers they had moved would suggest that tourists had violated clearly posted warnings and entered dangerous terrain despite obvious prohibitions. But Harlow needed additional elements to complete the misdirection. Over the following weeks, family members would plant evidence at locations throughout eastern Nevada that suggested the convoy had encountered mechanical problems, become lost, and scattered across vast areas while seeking help. Vehicle debris would be scattered along legitimate Forest Service roads. Personal belongings would be left at abandoned mining camps and remote water sources. Most importantly, they would create a timeline that would exhaust investigative resources while revealing nothing. Witnesses at gas stations and truck stops would remember seeing vehicles that matched convoy descriptions at widely separated locations and different times. Credit card transactions would suggest that families had split up and attempted different escape routes when their original plans failed. The Harlows had maintained contacts throughout the region during their years as contractors and salvage operators. Former colleagues in military and civilian agencies could be persuaded to provide information about search operations and redirect them toward areas where no evidence would ever be found. But the most effective element of their cover-up would be the Nevada desert itself, the basin and range country that had swallowed atomic test debris and crashed military aircraft could absorb evidence of 43 murders without leaving traces that any investigation could follow. The Clark County Coroner's Office, October 15, 1989. Case remains open, pending location of physical evidence. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department opened a missing persons investigation on August 29, 1989, when Harold Westbrook failed to call his daughter from their scheduled stop in Salt Lake City. By September 1st, families from across Southern California were reporting that their relatives had not returned from the Nevada vacation trip. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, assigned to coordinate the investigation, faced challenges that reflected both the scale of the disappearance and the jurisdictional complexities of Western law enforcement. 12 families had vanished across multiple states, following routes that crossed federal, state, and county boundaries. No single agency had clear authority to mount a comprehensive search, and cooperation between jurisdictions moved at bureaucratic speeds that frustrated desperate family members. The investigation began with the last confirmed sighting of the convoy in Ely, Nevada. Motel records showed that the families had spent the night of August 25th at the KOA campground, where other guests remembered seeing their vehicles and equipment. But no witness could provide details about their planned route or destinations beyond general statements about scenic highways and desert exploration. Santos contacted the Nye County Sheriff's Department, requesting assistance with searches along State Route 50 and its connecting roads. Sheriff's deputies found the displaced barriers at mile marker 314 and tire tracks that suggested multiple vehicles had passed the checkpoint within recent days. But desert winds and normal traffic had obscured specific details that might have indicated the convoy's fate. The discovery prompted a broader search of the ghost road and surrounding terrain. Ground teams followed the abandoned highway for its entire 20-mile length, finding no evidence of vehicles or human activity except for scattered debris that could have originated from any source over many years. Helicopter searches covered wider areas, but revealed nothing that suggested recent accidents or emergency situations. Meanwhile, the Harlow's misdirection campaign was beginning to influence the investigation's direction. Witnesses at truck stops and gas stations reported seeing recreational vehicles that matched convoy descriptions at locations throughout Utah and Colorado. Credit card records suggested that some families had continued their travels beyond their planned routes, possibly extending their vacation or changing destinations without notifying relatives. These reports created false leads that consumed investigative resources while revealing nothing. Detective Santos found herself coordinating searches across 4 states, following tips that led to dead ends and evidence that suggested the convoy had fragmented into smaller groups that were traveling independently. By October, the investigation had stalled, despite extensive publicity and reward offers from desperate families. No answers would come. The federal government's response to the convoy disappearance revealed bureaucratic territoriality that effectively shielded the Harlows from detection. Multiple agencies claimed jurisdiction over different aspects of the case, but none accepted responsibility for comprehensive investigation that might have uncovered the truth. The Air Force maintained that no military installations or activities existed in the area where the convoy had disappeared. The Ghost Road had been abandoned years earlier, and current operations never extended into civilian-accessible terrain. Security personnel had no record of contact with unauthorized vehicles, and radar installations detected nothing unusual during the relevant time period. The Forest Service acknowledged that recreational vehicles had occasionally violated barriers along the abandoned highway, but claimed that such incidents were county law enforcement matters. Federal land managers had neither resources nor authority to conduct criminal investigations, particularly when evidence suggested that missing persons had never actually entered federal territory. The Bureau of Land Management denied any knowledge of the hand-drawn map that had directed the convoy toward the cutoff. No agency maintained scenic byways in that region, and no official publications described attractions that would interest recreational travelers. The map appeared to be either a hoax or a product of misinformation from unknown sources. Each agency's denial was technically accurate, but collectively misleading. The institutional separation that protected classified operations also created gaps in oversight, where criminal activity could flourish without detection. The Harlows had grown up in this environment, learning to exploit federal bureaucracy as effectively as they exploited the desert's natural concealment. Detective Santos recognized the stonewalling, but lacked authority to overcome it. County investigators could not compel federal agencies to cooperate, and higher political levels showed no interest in resolving jurisdictional disputes over missing tourists. The case gradually shifted from active investigation to administrative maintenance, with periodic reviews that accomplished nothing. Family members organized their own search efforts, hiring private investigators and offering rewards that eventually totaled over $200,000. But private searchers faced the same obstacles that had frustrated official investigations: vast terrain, multiple jurisdictions, and agencies that provided minimal cooperation. By December 1989, the Riverside County Vacation Club had effectively vanished from administrative memory except for open case files that no one actively pursued. The 43 missing persons represented statistical anomalies that warranted occasional attention but not substantial resource allocation. The bureaucratic machine that had been designed to protect national security had accomplished something else entirely. It had provided perfect cover for mass murder in the Nevada desert. The Harlows' success in eliminating the Riverside convoy led to overconfidence that would eventually destroy them. Through the early 1990s, they continued operating their checkpoint scheme, targeting smaller groups of travelers who violated the barriers on the Ghost Road. Their methods grew more sophisticated and their profits increased, but they also began taking risks that professional criminals would have avoided. The mistake that ended their enterprise came from an unexpected source: their own prosperity. By 1993, the family had accumulated wealth that attracted attention from federal agencies that monitored unusual financial activity. Large cash deposits, purchases of expensive equipment, and lifestyle improvements that exceeded their reported income triggered investigations that initially focused on tax evasion, but gradually revealed more serious crimes. Internal Revenue Service auditors discovered that multiple Harlow family members had claimed salvage contracts that generated substantial income, but the companies that supposedly employed them either didn't exist or had no record of any business relationships. Bank records showed large cash deposits that couldn't be explained through legitimate sources. The investigation expanded when federal agents traced some of the Harlows' equipment to military sources that had reported thefts of classified materials. Electronic components, communications gear, and weapons systems that had disappeared from installations across the Southwest were discovered in the family's Canyon compound during a raid that was originally planned as a tax enforcement action. But the agents who searched the Harlow property found evidence of crimes far more serious than tax evasion or equipment theft. Personal belongings from missing travelers, vehicle identification plates that had been reported stolen, and documentation that revealed the scope of the family's checkpoint operations over multiple years. Most damning was Jeremiah Harlow's personal record-keeping. The old man had maintained detailed logs of every operation, including notes about the victims and inventories of property taken from them. His journals contained entries that corresponded precisely to missing persons reports filed throughout the region during the previous decade. Among those entries was a detailed account of August 26, 1989, and the convoy of 12 vehicles that had provided the Harlows with their most profitable single operation. The federal task force that dismantled the Harlow operation in October 1993 recovered evidence that resolved dozens of missing persons cases across 3 states. But the investigation also revealed the limitations of a justice system that had failed to protect travelers who had died years earlier in the Nevada desert. 7 members of the Harlow family were arrested on charges that ranged from tax evasion to multiple counts of first-degree murder. Physical evidence from their compound connected them definitively to the Riverside Convoy and 14 other incidents involving missing travelers. DNA analysis of personal belongings confirmed the identities of victims whose families had spent years searching for answers. The trials that followed exposed the bureaucratic failures that had allowed the crimes to continue undetected. Federal agencies had maintained jurisdiction over territory where murders were occurring, while denying responsibility for investigating incidents that fell outside their immediate missions. State and county authorities had lacked resources to search vast federal lands where evidence was concealed. But the most disturbing revelation concerned the level of complicity that had enabled the Harlow's operations. Former military personnel had provided equipment and expertise to the family. Scrap dealers had purchased stolen materials without asking uncomfortable questions about their sources. Local officials had accepted explanations for missing persons that they should have recognized as implausible. The conspiracy extended beyond criminal activity into a culture of willful ignorance that pervaded institutions throughout the region. Defense attorneys argued that their clients were products of a system that had trained them in violence and then abandoned them when military contracts ended. The Harlows had learned their skills as government contractors, authorized to strip classified materials from crashed aircraft and eliminate evidence of failed experiments. When those contracts ended, they had simply continued using those skills in private enterprise. The argument carried no legal weight, but it highlighted uncomfortable truths about the militarization of the American West and the communities that had grown up around classified operations. The Nevada desert had been transformed into a laboratory for weapons testing that had produced both technological advances and human casualties who were never acknowledged in official records. Jeremiah Harlow died in federal custody before his trial concluded, taking with him detailed knowledge of crimes that stretched back decades. Other family members received sentences that ranged from life imprisonment to lesser terms for cooperation with ongoing investigations. But none of the convictions could restore the 43 people who had died on the Ghost Road or repair the damage done to families who had searched for answers through years of official indifference. The Riverside County Vacation Club had achieved a form of justice, but at a cost that measured more than individual lives. The Ghost Road remains closed today, its barriers reinforced with concrete barriers and federal warnings that promise serious penalties for violation. The Hawthorne Army Depot has been largely decommissioned, its weapons storage, bunkers empty, and its access roads abandoned to the desert. But the landscape that swallowed 43 travelers in 1989 retains its capacity for concealing evidence that investigators might prefer not to discover. Families of the Riverside victims received settlements from the federal government that acknowledged systemic failures in protecting citizens who had trusted official warnings to keep them safe. The money could not replace lost relatives, but it provided resources for memorial scholarships and safety programs designed to prevent similar tragedies. Sarah Chen, the dispatcher who recorded James Morrison's final transmission, retired from emergency services, but kept copies of the tape that proved government agencies had received timely warning of the murders. Her testimony during congressional hearings contributed to reforms that improved coordination between jurisdictions and reduced bureaucratic obstacles to missing persons investigations. The Harlow compound in the Box Canyon was demolished, its contents inventoried, and its buildings destroyed. But archaeologists who surveyed the site before demolition discovered evidence of activities that predated the family's known crimes by decades. Bone fragments and personal belongings suggested that the canyon had been used as a disposal site for much longer than official records indicated. Those discoveries prompted broader investigations that may never be completed. The Nevada desert has absorbed evidence of many activities that were never intended to become public knowledge, and distinguishing legitimate military operations from criminal enterprises requires access to classified records that government agencies remain reluctant to release. Conspiracy theorists continue to promote alternative explanations for the Riverside disappearance, alien abductions, secret government experiments, cover-ups that extend into the highest levels of federal authority. But the truth documented in court records is more disturbing than any fiction. A family of government contractors who applied military training to mass murder, operating for years in terrain where bureaucratic confusion provided better concealment than any desert canyon. Local truckers still report strange radio transmissions along State Route 50 on August nights, when the desert wind carries voices that plead for help from places that no longer appear on any map. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.